Rainer, it's wonderful to see you. Which part of the world are you in? Is this your home office?
I am in Ealing W5 in London. It is
Gosh,
my home office. You can see the beautiful art behind me, which is a thing that we do.
it's fantastic. I didn't expect you to be quite so specific as to where you are, because people are going to come knocking on the door now. But anyway, let's get to some of the wonderful questions I've got for you. So, listen, conductor and comedian. I mean, what's that all about?
Well, I began my life actually in parallel, two completely different interests, but running side by side. I became interested in music at school, seriously played the piano. I studied music. I'm a trained musician, but at the same time, as a lot of people do, they get interested in something else. And mine was comedy. These days, you watch it on the TV. Of course, in my day, it was Monty Python and listening to those old albums and reciting them by rote in the playground. And I slightly obsessed about that. Subsequently, a friend of mine, a comedian friend of mine, said that in fact, in doing that, we were actually parrot fashion, learning how a joke was constructed. And that's very true. So these two things combined for me after I left university, and only slowly when I moved firstly into music, then into comedy, and then I wrote a show which combined the two.
I love that. And also the fact that you mentioned a parrot, because obviously anyone who's a Monty Python fan will know about the parrot. So that's brilliant.
The Parrot sketch, exactly. Well, that is, well, you have to be of a certain era, I think, to remember that. But essentially, it was probably their most famous sketch, in which a man goes into a pet shop to complain about a parrot which he's just bought, which was in fact dead, a Norwegian blue, beautiful plumage. But you see, it's still there.
I love it. I love it. So which came first then? The music came first, is that right? Or the comedy?
Well, really, completely in parallel. I couldn't identify a moment when I wasn't interested in both, actually. So they came together, but when I left university, I actually began working in music. My last job with a title was touring manager of the London Festival Orchestra. So I did that very serious sort of industry job in that environment for a good few years. But at the same time, I actually began moonlighting on the London comedy circuit, doing stand-up. Basically, you go on, you have 5 minutes. If they like it, they'll get you back for 10 minutes. If they like that, they'll get you back for 20 minutes and they'll pay you. And so that gradually turned into a kind of a little job, another job. So I was earning serious money at it, pocket money, really. But, you know, actually in the old days, it used to be cash. You'd walk home and you'd have this little area of your house which is full of £20 notes, which is what I had basically. And I thought at one point, do you know what? I want to see if I can do this as a job. So I, one fine day, walked into the office of the London Festival Orchestra and said, do you know what? I'm going to actually do the comedy full time. They knew, of course, that I was doing that. I'd taken my holidays and gone to Edinburgh Festival, for example. So that's the point that it became not music, but actually pure comedy for a while. Then in 1996, I had to write a new show for Edinburgh. And I thought, why don't I write about a show about something I'm actually interested in, rather than rambling on about my girlfriend who's just left me? You know, why don't they make the playing out the same stuff they make the black box out of? What's that all about? How do you get the sellotape started? That kind of stuff. I thought, I'll write a show about classical music. I always thought it was too serious a subject, really, to be talked about on a comedy stage, as most people would. But I found that actually I could make it funny. Not funny for fanar aficionados. Oh, that was in G minor, not the original key of G major. Mozart, not Haydn, you fool. It was really something that I was trying to make funny in a stand-up environment. Anybody would get the jokes. And I found in that, doing that, I'd actually found my voice. You know, I got that on radio and then on TV. And people recognize that here's somebody who actually does know about it. Actually, I can play the piano, you know, well, dare I say. It's been, the struggle of my entire life playing the piano. You know how it is. You're never quite the end of some jobs, and that's one of them. And people recognize that, you know, here's somebody who can be funny about it. So that became my thing. And that's when the two interests in 1996 really came together.
And that's brilliant. And that's what's so important when you actually go to and cover the stuff that you're expert in, because nobody else can talk about this the way you can, because you know it, you live it, you breathe it. So I love that. That's really great. Fantastic. So where have you conducted then when you were conducting orchestras?
Well, basically, I must maybe continue the story. So 1996 was a solo show. that was a stand-up show, me and a microphone and a piano. And then 1997, having had the success that I had in 1996, I went back and I thought, you know what, some musicians could play some of these gags. I mean, it's hard to describe them. You have to be there. Well, maybe watch my YouTube channel and check out some of the 40 million hits that's got. But I basically wrote things that musicians played. And then, of course, I had to conduct those musicians. And those musicians then turned into more musicians. And then people started asking me, can you conduct our orchestra and do that, you know, with our full orchestra? So people I didn't know. And at that point, I had to study conducting. So I've actually conducted in more countries than you can wave a stick at. I have to say that, don't I? But of course, in the UK, you know, the Philharmonic Orchestra, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, the BBC orchestras, all of those things. But also I had the pleasure of you know, appearing in places like St Petersburg, the St Petersburg Philharmonic, in Australia, all over the world, in Asia, in North America. So this unique thing, dare I say, allow me to say that I can do, gives me access to orchestras, which, you know, as somebody who was conducting Beethoven symphonies, just that would really would dream of, because I can bring sort of something very different, a different value to what those orchestras are doing. I can allow them to reach out to audiences that they would never be able to get to otherwise, people who might come to a comedy show but would never sit, for example, through a Bruckner symphony. And that is actually part of my message as a presenter, which is that, you know, those people are reaching out to new markets effectively without fundamentally changing anything they do. They're still playing their instruments. They're still being musicians. They're still being fantastic instrumentalists, but they're reaching out with the aid of somebody who's helping them facilitate that with them, with the music that I brought, the arrangements that I brought, and the presentation that I'm able to do.
I think that's fantastic. And I would be one of those people actually who probably wouldn't sit through a symphony, which is a terrible thing to admit. And I'm going to put
it's
that.
Not.
It's
that's
not.
The whole, people, do you know what? That's almost something that I fight against. People regard classical music as a kind of thing that they should aspire to. I would really love to do, but I'm ashamed to say that I don't. And the reason why I don't is because I'm a little bit stupid. That's the implication. In fact, it's just a taste thing, really. And at some point, I decided, you know, that this is something that I enjoy, but it doesn't make anybody more intelligent. You could tell me, Maria, about, you know, pop history which would leave me agog, because I really know nothing about that at all. But nobody ever dreamed of saying, I don't know anything about pop music. It's a thing about classical music. And my aim, my vision, my ambition is to break that down, to make it completely accessible for everybody, so nobody thinks twice. Yeah, we went to see the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and what a great time we had.
I love that. Thank you for that. So I do wonder, though, how do these musicians react when you tell them what you're going to do with them and how you're going to work with them? I mean, you must get some reactions when they don't know you, perhaps.
Well, of course, you know, a full symphony orchestra, which is when I'm acting as a guest conductor, that could be 80 people. It could be 100 people, actually. I mean, the number varies depending on the music they're going to play. But with me, it's 60 to 80, depending on how many string players they've got. And of course, when you stand up as a new manager, dare I use that, and say, hello guys, I'm Rainer Hersh. We've got this rehearsal period. It's like a kind of briefing, you can imagine it. And tell them what they're going to do. Of course, in amongst 80 people, there is a range of opinions. Some people think I am the funniest person and the best thing that has ever happened to their orchestra, and they wish that I would conduct them every day of the year and that they could get rid of their regular chief conductor. Other people wish I would just go home and leave them to play their Bruckner symphonies, which is what they really want to do. And there's a lot of people in there who are waiting to see what happens. So there's a lot of parallels there straight away, and this is something that I'm talking about when I'm talking in front of corporate audiences, in the sort of reactions you get and the sort of process that you have to go through with a new team, because that's what the orchestra is, in order to show them and that you have got something to offer and that you can add value to what they're doing and to build their confidence. And one of the ways I build confidence, for a start, I am a trained conductor. I mean, having done that thing thing that I talked about, the Edinburgh experience, and having found myself in charge of groups of musicians, I then had to study conducting, which I did at the Royal Academy of Music, the Blackheath Conservatory, with, you know, Vienna and all sorts of places. So I can show them that I'm a technically competent conductor. So you could liken that to technically a trained manager, if you want, somebody who's got experience. I've got also a lot of experience of conducting orchestras around the world. I mean, hundreds of performances. So they trust me for that. They also see that when we're practicing these kind of routines, which they have to play in, they're basically playing their instruments, you know, in the same way. They can see that they're funny. I mean, they'll make the things we're doing will make them laugh. And accordingly, you're building trust, because it's getting laughs in the rehearsal studio. I mean, not, you know, stupid slapstick, but musically intelligent and effective and clearly communicative routines. And they start to think, actually, do you know what? This might actually work. And then you can see, you know, the ones who are undecided, you know, you can see their body language change. And of course, when we get in front of the audience, and they get the orchestra gets the kind of reaction that they never would normally get, because it's a comedy show. Essentially, I'm asking for the sort of response from the audience that a comedian demands, and that's where I come from. And the comedian demands response. You know, you give something out, you get a response back. It's not like classical music when you sit there, you know, interesting use of harmony. I wonder if those violins using catgut strings or what, you know, it's an immediate response. All that grows, and we always end up with a hugely successful show. And I'm pleased to say I've always been asked back, so something's gone right.
Well, I know, because we work together, so I know how it works. But maybe it'd be nice to explain to people who haven't seen you or don't know how it works. How do you make it work on stage?
Well, in front of a corporate audience, of course, I am describing my experience. I mean, I stand before them with the story that I've told you, which is not somebody who was, you know, born to conducting, but someone who's actually had to learn it. And that is a kind of it's a form of management, really, of course. And in learning that, I have learned that these parallels exist between the orchestra and management scenarios. Any complex situation, the orchestra is divided up into departments. Effectively, they're called sections in the orchestra, but the first violin section, the second violin section. And it is news to most people, those sections don't actually know what the other sections are doing. They've only got their own music in front of them. The one person who's got the blueprint for the product that the orchestra is presenting to its customers is the conductor. That those sections also have hierarchies in them. All this, you know, there's the leader of the section, and there's the people behind them, and it's the object of the leader of the section to keep people operating as a homogeneous unit. All this is very analogous to the situation that exists in complex environments when you have people who come together to create something greater than themselves. So I begin with my journey, which is, as I've said, I'm allowing orchestras to reach out to different markets, and what that has meant for me. It has meant learning about this, and I will walk them through what in fact is an orchestra, how an orchestra operates, and then from there, what it is the conductor does to make better, to add value to what the orchestra is doing. Because it's a big question, what the hell does a conductor actually do? And so we tackle that, and I can actually practically show them that. So on stage is me. I have my PowerPoint, of course, and I can do this also with musicians, which I frequently do. A little group of my musicians I have called the Rainer Hersh Orchestra, and we provide demonstrations actually in musical sense. If I don't do it with the musicians, then the demonstrations, they come from the PowerPoint. They're little musical clips of, you know, 10 or 15 seconds. We're not sitting there listening to a whole Mozart symphony. To provide clear examples of how these things that I'm talking about apply to the orchestra. And from that, by the way, all of this is, I invite the orchestra, or the audience takes parallels from, they find parallels in what they're doing, and the parallels are very strong. I don't have to underline them and say, this is what it means for you folks. I'm saying to them, this is how the orchestra works, and you will see that there are parallels in what you do. You are not alone, effectively.
Yeah, and it is powerful. I think the orchestra is so powerful. I love that. And the fact that they're all, you know, professional and they're all talented and they're all experts in what they do. I like that as well. So how do you then create a team building session with 6 people or 600 people? What does that look like?
Well, usually we do this hand in hand with the discussion about conductor as leader, but it can stand on its own. And in that environment, I have my musicians with it. That has to happen with the musicians. We basically divide the delegates, the conference attendees, into groups, and each one goes off, and their team has a mission, which is to learn how to play a specific instrument. They're percussion instruments, actually. You might look at them and think, oh, terrible, they're easy, but actually they're not just whacking them, they're actually playing them in specific rhythms, and there are pitches with some of them. We've even got, yes, you'll like this, Maria, recorders in there, but they actually have to play little riffs on their recorder. So maybe you haven't done that from school, you know, maybe you never did it, but to find that your task in the space of 45 minutes is to learn a couple of riffs and to know when to play them, by the way. They're not just playing all together. It's not like a big drumming exercise. They're playing orchestrally. So they go off into their teams with the members of my orchestra. They come back into the group and they put it all together in a song. And I have to say that the experience is joyful and really affirming, and people see from that actually the value of all those things that I've talked about earlier, the value of the individual section leaders, what the conductor is doing, because I'm actually showing them, you know, that, like I said, they're not playing all the time. They're playing sometimes, they're waiting, then they're playing the second pattern they've learned, and then they wait two or three sections, and so on. And so I'm cueing them. I mean, it's part of the conductor's job is to go, okay, guys, you know, recorders are written, cowbells, boom, you're on. And that is a very practical learning and an experience which really brings home the lessons of what I have spoken about. Provides an amazing experience for them, because they experience that community of coming together. They thought what they were doing was just a silly little bit, but actually it grows into something huge and really, as I say, affirming.
And yeah, wonderful, and something I'll never forget, I'm sure. But what do you do, because there's always going to be someone or a few people who just are really nervous, don't want to come out their shell. How do you encourage them?
Well, absolutely. There are some people who think they can't do anything musical. Well, the first thing is one doesn't say you're on, let's hear you do it. It's a question of encouragement, and it's a question of gradually growing their experience in that team building environment as you're growing the rest of the group. So, for example, you can demonstrate, you can listen to recordings and have them repeat. You can then join other groups. So I mentioned we're divided up into groups. Now with 600, it could be 10 groups actually, all doing different things, and 2 choirs, by the way. And okay, so okay guys, great. Let's go and see the triangle players. And then you actually move to and they can see, in fact, there's a relationship between what they're doing. They have to listen, of course. They have to know when to follow and when to lead, and when they're communicating with their different departments. And all that, as I say, is a very analogous situation to what is actually going on in their companies. People are not on all the time in projects. They are listening in, if you put that in inverted commas, to what other departments are doing and reacting to them. And so that experience and their confidence will grow. In that experience, their confidence will grow. And everybody comes together and has a great time in the end. And so, it's a finding a way in order to make it possible for them to be what it is they can do, to achieve what they can achieve.
Really powerful, very good. So I'm not supposed to do this with a comedian, but I can't resist. I think I know you well enough. Can you tell me a humorous story or a joke? Can you share one with us?
I don't do jokes like, comedians, but I've got a favourite story at the moment. Man goes to the cinema. Sitting next to him is a dog. It's a Labrador. Sitting next to him is the owner. Right, the film starts and the dog is transfixed. During the sad bits, big tears run down the dog's eyes, and during the funny bits, the dog throws its head back and laughs and laughs and laughs. Film comes to an end, and the man leans past the dog and says to the owner, "That is amazing. to see your dog react to the film like that. And the owner says, yes, it is amazing, isn't it? Because he hated the book.
I was on mute. So you missed my love, and that's fantastic. That's wonderful. I'm a dog lover.
It's a dog story.
It's a wonderful dog story because I am a dog lover, so you did really well. So, okay, so listen, Rainer, I'm going to put you in a time machine now because I have one, and I'm going to take you back. I'm going to take you back with what you know, all the experience that you have. When you first started doing your presentations, doing your conducting and your comedy, what advice would you give to Rainer when he was starting out, now that you have all this experience and knowledge?
I think it's very important to listen exactly to what the client wants in terms of their brief, because every brief is slightly different. And as I hope I've demonstrated, this is a very multifaceted story that I'm telling. It's a story about my own development. It's a story about conducting, about the problems that the conductor faces, within which I hope the listening audience finds parallels. So it is important for me to understand what part of that story the client particularly wants me to emphasize. It could be about different styles of leadership. It could be about a message, for example. I mean, and what part of my message is that the conductor has a vision for the piece, and it's up to the conductor to enroll everybody in that vision, irrespective of how the team personally would go about it. So it's important for me to find out what part of that message is important, and to come with that to the presentation, so we're not just on autopilot. At the presentation, I would say it's also important for me as a performer, and bear in mind that I've spent more years than I care to mention as a stand-up comedian, is to listen to the mood of what is going on. I actually often go to, the first part of the conference and listen to how that is happening. What is going on? So that when you walk on stage, you're already engaged, you're already in gear with the audience. And if you see what I mean, you're already operating at the same speed, and you know where they're coming from. And that has helped me enormously to present something which meets the client's ambitions and fulfills their ambitions.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much.